All right, guys, I think we're live. Hi, gentlemen, and hi, everyone out there. I'm McKenna Jordan. I'm the owner here at Murder by the Book in Houston, and I'm so happy that you're joining us here to celebrate the publication week of a new Michael Connelly book, the latest featuring Jack McAvoy, Fair Warning. Michael Connelly is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of the Bosch and Holler book series. He's also the executive producer of Bosch, 6 seasons in and going strong. We've been fortunate enough to host Mike many times here at Murder by the Book, and we're especially happy, given the circumstances, to be seeing him today, even virtually. I'm sure many of you have already read Fair Warning, or at least have it, but we do have signed copies if you're so inclined. We're also fortunate to be joined today by Gregg Hurwitz, New York Times bestselling author of 22 thrillers, including the Orphan X series, a series that we love here at Murder by the Book. He's also written screenplays on television scripts for many of the major studios and networks, comics for DC and Marvel, and political and culture pieces for the Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, and others. Because Gregg was gracious enough to join us and do today's interview, I think we're going to give him a chance a little bit later on to talk about his books. We will have signed book plates and Orphan X stickers for anyone who would like to read Gregg's books as well. So I think that we'll go ahead and turn it over to you guys. I'm going to go away for a few minutes and have fun with your discussion.
All right, thanks, Mick. So Mike, this is exciting. We got the book just came out this week. I loved it because I discovered you with The Poet was the first years that I read. I still remember walking into a bookstore and they had a whole display. It was the paperback edition that really blew out wide. That it's a great cover for The Poet too. And it's my favorite first line. I think of any of your books still, which you had a big fight with your editor about. Is that right?
Yeah. Death is my beat.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so long ago. I can't remember why, but he wanted to lose that first line.
And then didn't Stephen King come out and say it's one of the greatest first lines that he'd read, and you got to pull the Stephen King card?
Yeah, I definitely have played that card with, he's not my editor anymore, but he's the CEO of the company. So we're still in the same orbit, and I play the Stephen King card whenever I can.
Just during negotiations.
Yeah.
So part of this, so Fair Warning came out this week. For me, I'm very happy to be back with Jack, because like I said, that was my starting point. I'm one of the few readers that Harry Bosch was my second point of entry with you. I grew a beard as part of the Be Like Mike sort of opening week launch. So I got on that.
Now you got to dye it white.
I'll get there. So I love the opening chapter. It's just great. It's very classic Connelly. It's so self-contained. It's this great little nugget that just grabs you. And it's so interesting how there's this sense of tension that's underlying it, and you don't know why, and you don't fully know, and it doesn't go as is predicted. And I was wondering, it seems to me, and I might be projecting on this, there's this sort of clarity of that opening that I was wondering if that was if this is one of those rare instances that the first thing that came to you was the opening chapter when you were thinking about the book. Or did something else happen first?
This is pretty amazing revelation here. That was the last thing I wrote on the book.
All right. So far this interview is going really well for me.
No, what happened was, I start with Jack and I'm going down the road, and it took a long time to get to the villain. And so I turned the book in, and one of the big notes I got from my editor, not the one I play the Stephen King card with, an editor that's worked with me for about 20 books and is fabulous, Asha Muchnick. One of her notes coming back was, we need to figure out how to get the bad guys are known as the Shrike. We have to figure out how to get him up forward into the story. Now he's mentioned, and Jack is kind of dancing around finding out who this guy is. So he's not totally oblique, but there's no like physical villain so far into the book. And so she didn't say write a new first chapter. She said, how can we move him up? And so that's what I wrote that chapter. Actually after turning the book in. And so one of the questions that often comes up at these things, and I know you get them, is what's your what's the editing process like? Is it difficult? And I always say, I think this is my 34th or 35th book, and 34 out of 34 times my book has improved, and that happened again with the fair warning, and there you see one of the reasons why. That was something suggested by an editor, and here you really connect with it. So wow, that's
it's also so interesting. It really changes the whole read. It's like that Hitchcock metaphor about, right, you can have an explosion go off, but if you show the bomb under the table and then you cut to the conversation, that's how you build, that suspense versus a jump scare.
right.
And it really changes the whole quality of the book. It's a great note from your editor, because you feel like as you're reading, you're waiting to get back to this. And the Shrike is so well defined. Do you want to talk about the Shrike a little bit, of where he earned that name and why he relates to it?
Well, I mean, I'm sure you're on to your next book, and we have like this, at least I do have this amnesia. Like I'm writing a book, I'm well into another book. And so what's come up this week as I promoted this book is the way this guy kills people is very particular and very weird. And they say, how did you come up with that? And I can't even remember. I know, as writers, we're always throwing out a net and something interests us, and we metaphorically put it in our pocket to use later. Somewhere along my travels on internet or reading newspapers and so forth, I read about this thing called internal decapitation, where someone's neck is twisted so badly, kind of like out of The Exorcist or something, that all internally is disconnected, yet your head remains on your body. It's not a real decapitation. And so I wanted to use that. So that was just something floating around in the back of my head to use someday. And I started using it with this killer. And then, as is the routine in these books, especially serial killer books, you come up with a name. And again, I don't know how I made this connection, but the Shrike is a bird that's a very violent bird. It's nicknamed the butcher bird. And what it does is come up on its prey, usually like a small a baby squirrel or something, and grabs it by the back of the neck and shakes it so viciously it breaks its victim's neck. And so that's how we came up with the Shrike.
It's such a good alignment, because a lot of times in serial killer books, they have these nicknames that just don't feel like they land all the way. And that sounds like something that's so real, especially with the animal kingdom overlap. So that was pretty cool. And you kind of trotted out slowly, which I liked. So question for you now, if the first chapter wasn't the opening image, do you remember what the first thing is that came to you for this book? Did you just think of the whole plot at once? Did you think of, it's a really hard book. It's such a pure mystery in some ways. It's really hard to talk about without any spoiler.
Yeah, I mean, again, it was casting the net. You read to fill your gas tank. And I read a report last year that the Pentagon had put out a directive to everyone in the military service not to submit their DNA to any kind of DNA analytics firm like 23andMe and so forth, because of, quote, concerns over security. And I read that and I thought, well, that's interesting, because millions of people are doing this. What are the concerns over security? And I started, a research dive into it, and learned that, at the moment, at least, the government is observing this industry and formulating controls and regulations. But right now, it's a pretty much unregulated industry that is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And so that's just, that's a pitch over the plate for me. And what I've done in the past is use Jack McAvoy, the reporter, to follow cases that cut across technological changes in our culture and society. So once I started going into this deep dive about DNA security, I pretty much quickly understood that this would be a Jack McAvoy book. And that was perfect timing because of what's going on in our society in terms of trust in the media. And it's become such a hotbed issue. and enemy of the people, fake news, all these things are going on right now. And that again made it a perfect story for a journalist. So it all kind of comes together unintentionally, unplanned. It all just kind of came together once I read that little article and then did some of my own research.
Oh, that's cool. The way that the puzzle pieces align, it reminded me not in content or plot or anything like that, but in terms of the shape of it, of another one of your earlier books. It's one of my favorites, which is Blood Work. I feel like there was it's in a conversation with that book in a certain way of how it lays out and pieces together. It's a beautifully constructed little puzzle. And there's a lot of suspense. There's a lot of, the trademark stuff, the character stuff, but the way that it's built to me was really, I think that's where I feel like showing off. That's the aspect where you're just like a cut above in terms of how you can construct a puzzle that way, where all these pieces and the way that you're turning the cards over, I just thought it worked beautifully. So,
well, I think a lot of that, interestingly, at least to me, is the influence of the television show. And I've been really involved in the television show. And what we've done is taken singular narration books, but you ride in the Bosch books, at least the early books, totally in his head. And then we make a TV show and we have to spread out the storytelling and we have to give all these other characters their due. Bosch can't be in every scene of a TV show, even though he's in every scene of the books. And so it's spreading out the storytelling. And so the difference to me between Blood Work and Fair Warning is that there's multiple lines of narration in Fair Warning, and you're talking about flipping over the cards. That makes it so much easier, and it also helps you build the idea of what's going on here. But there's enough, I know enough to be intrigued and to keep going to see when it all comes together. And so I guess it's just the influences of a life so far that have come together in this book. And it's one of the things when I look at it, I notice that this is the kind of book even though it's in the lineage of the Scarecrow and the Poet, I don't think I could have written this kind of book, back when I was writing Blood Work or the Poet and so forth.
Yeah, it's almost like there's a mosaic and you're choosing which pieces you're going to take out of it. Because there's a lot of there's a lot more narration shifts than you used early on. And it's interesting. And sometimes the information that's left out is more compelling than what's put in, so it's like every card you turn over, there's several more questions that are raised even when we're getting it. I want to talk about something a little bit different now, which is you portray a woman, the first victim here, who is, like some victims, promiscuous, right? And you're walking the line between showing that baldly without assigning any blame to her for what happens with her. I thought it was an interesting approach, right? It's nuanced and it's in line with the, everyone counts or no one counts aspect, where she's not this sort of virginal victim who's a pure-hearted damsel in distress. But it's part of the Connelly mythology that everybody is textured, and you're sort of dancing around these issues of trying to show real rounded people, and some of the people who are three-dimensional characters have a variety of different traits. And I thought it was cool how you sort of address that, and it comes up and there's some language and conversation around it that's different depending on if it's Jack talking or it's a woman talking. And I was just wondering, was that something you gave a lot of thought to, or did that just come up as it rolled along about how you were going to address that and how much you were going to get into it?
Well, it's definitely something you want to be sensitive about. And, it really came out of the research. I credit this book I read, but there's tons of stuff out there now about what they're finding out about the human genome. And to me, it's just fascinating stuff that and nothing is for sure yet, but that they can research and find combinations of gene strands that explain behavior. That to me is amazing. And I don't make this stuff up. I've gotten a couple of reviews where it says I'm veering into science fiction and stuff. Nothing in this book is made up. It's happened. It's the current status of the science. And so there are people researching promiscuity as a genetic makeup. And to me, yeah, there's going to be some sensitive ways of portraying it in there. But, I have these characters. I have Rachel, I have Jack, who have different takes on it. But I just thought it could be just an interesting thing to carry through in the story.
It's also interesting because I feel like the more we learn about that and the genetic underlying of traits, the harder it is to be judgmental about anyone's behavior in a lot of ways. It gets tricky because you start to see everything through a bit of a different filter. So with this, I was, one of the things I was thinking about, and I think about this a lot as I, A, get older, and B, I'm working on more books, as we get out of just thinking in stories and start to get more in touch with what underlies them. And a lot of what we all write about and what you write about, like as is written on your t-shirt, are values, right? It's like at the end of the day, it's about, and this is, there's a journalistic set of values. There's the values of what you turn over and what you owe to sources, right? There's values about how you share a story. There's the obvious values of what the cops are going after. And in your books, obviously, there's a strong emphasis on that. With Harry Bosch, it's what his edict and the things that drive him morally are. But I was kind of wondering where you think that came from in you, because it's not something people think about or ask that often when it's with mystery or thriller writers. But obviously, you have a really strong sense of that. You're drawn to journalism and journalistic ethics. You're drawn to cops. There's all this sort of etiquette in the ways that it interlaces. And I was noticing that in the scenes, even around when someone's sharing a story with somebody else, what are the moves you could do to kind of undermine somebody? You're constantly interested in that. And I was wondering if that was something that was a source of sort of, justice and right and wrong for you when you were young. Was it something you got really into with journalism? Like how did you rolling up your sleeves and playing around in that kind of clay, was that always an interest?
No, not really. I mean, you mentioned the journalism. A lot of it was in the, from the journalism. But I didn't grow up feeling like justice denied in any aspect of my life. A lot of it also came from the code, very basic essays from Raymond Chandler about your heroes should have a code and they should live by those codes, or at least attempt to live by those codes. And so, the everybody counts or nobody counts was me reacting to that kind of advice from another writer in the form of an essay, that, this guy's code would be to be fair no matter who he deals with. And that translates into everybody counts or nobody counts. Depending on which character I write about, that code is different. It's either, I think the highest level is what Harry Bosch does, but I think Mickey Haller has a different one. And Jack does as well. Jack's is probably a line that's more movable. He's, or it's a line where he feels comfortable at least putting one foot across the line. And so, I'm very much aware that I have readers that will follow my books no matter who I'm writing about, but I definitely want these characters not to be all of the same stock, not to be all everybody counts people. I want them to have different levels of characteristics, because, that's what it comes down to. That's the connection point. That's what makes books successful. You have the Orphan X universe. Why don't you answer your own question? How, because it was a difficult question, so I'm throwing it back at you. Like, how do you set up that universe in terms of the morality of it and the choices the characters make?
Well, it's funny because I feel like we all have a line around which a whole world coalesces, and for you, it's everybody counts or no one counts, right? And there's a line for me. The Orphan X series, he's a assassin who is, trained up in the government, who's now kind of on his own, and he helps desperate people with nowhere else to turn. And there's a line early on when he's pulled out of a foster home, when he first starts his training, that his handler and father figure says to him, the hard part won't be turning you into a killer. The hard part will be keeping you human. And that for me is the line around which all the stories coalesce. Because at the end of the day, we can do all the action and the research and the procedural, but if you're not dug in with a character who is struggling the way that readers do, the way that you and I do as writers, then nobody really cares. And for me, the whole series is about that sort of tension of how do you move single-mindedly towards perfection of a mission, but humanity and that sense of understanding other people, it's always messy, it's always gray, it's always confusing. And so I didn't want to just write a hero that's guns a-blazing going ahead. And in every book, I'm sort of undermining and teasing apart the archetype of the sort of, OCD stone cold assassin who lives by his rules. So every book finds him having to break those rules when it comes to the strange language of intimacy, And so there's always these opportunities to do it. One of my other favorite scenes in Fair Warning, it's funny because I mentioned the opening. For me, it's a very classic suspenseful opening. There's a great scene, I don't want to give anything away, where Jack comes upon a piece of evidence in a manner that he's not supposed to. And there's this protracted negotiation for how he can get the evidence without breaking the law while covering the sources. Does someone else have to get it and give it to them? And who touches it first? And it was this really funny thing. And I noticed in that his line, it is more variable, right? He's trying to figure out how to get the evidence for himself in a way that doesn't implicate him, that he can tell the truth. But it's very much the letter, not the spirit of the law in that case for him, because he wants to get at what's beneath it. And that was a cool little do-si-do that you had in there.
Yeah, I mean, I know what you're talking about. I mean, it's not that big a giveaway. He and Rachel come across a cache of documents in a dead guy's house. And it's like, I can't take these because I'm the journalist, but you could take them and give them to me, and then you're my source, and I'm cool. And that's what I guess I was just trying to indicate, that there's more of a sliding rule for Jack, and and that can make him interesting, and at the same time, it also makes him pretty different from Harry Bosch. I had an additional complication in this book, is that Fair Warning is a real news organization. It's a news site that does consumer reporting and protection and investigation, and I'm on the board of directors of it. And Jack's boss in this book, Myron Levin, is a real person. He's a real guy who runs Fair Warning. And so I went to them and the board and so forth and asked for permission. I've always put Jack in real places. The first book, he's Rocky Mountain News, now defunct. Then he was at the LA Times, now a shadow of what it once was. And now he's in this new kind of form of journalism at a nonprofit news site. And I'm using, again, a real place. But I did give the manuscript to Myron because he's a character in it. I don't want him to be embarrassed or anything like that. And, Jack does, as I said, he puts one foot over the line in places, or he concocts that way of being able to get the material he needs. And then I had to wait for Myron to come back on the, with notes and so forth of what he thought about the book. And I was kind of cringing where he'd say, like, I really don't wish a reporter of mine would do that, but he that one passed by him. So I felt good about that.
Look forward to the 2021 Mike Conley story, which is the Michael Conley Fair Warning lawsuit that's going to come out of this. It's always sketchy when you're dealing with real people because you so want to honor everything about them, but things have to bend. It's like, even with a procedural that is pinned down in fact, it's like things have to give and take. It's never going to be, you want verisimilitude, right? You want the ring of telling detail, but if it clings too closely to reality, it gets dull fast. So
yeah, I mean, the one thing in the book, it's a nonprofit. It relies on donations, and support from people. And so in the book, Myron, who's editor in chief and runs the whole show, is often on the phone talking to donors, trying to keep it going, trying to keep money coming in. And that the real Myron, when I sent him the manuscript, that was his biggest note, that he thought I was exaggerating how much he's beating the bushes for money. And I agreed. I've not been in his newsroom for days at a time, seeing how much he does that. But I said it's really important because the books also hopefully stand on a higher level, or another level, not a higher level, but another level of reflecting where we are in terms of media. And that's the reality. The newspaper business has collapsed basically. And it's kind of moved out, it's decentralized, and it's moved out to a lot of this nonprofit, and they need money to keep going. So I wanted to make that a pretty significant
for people, for our Congress people, they're recommended to spend 30 hours a week minimum on the phones raising money.
Yeah.
So think about how much time is devoted to the other thing. I mean, it's weird with the way that the market forces are working in all these fields. Fundraising almost becomes a primary focus. All right, question. What piece of advice do you wish now, where you are, that you could give young Michael Connelly pre-Black Echo about any aspect of your career, writing, publishing industry, where your concerns are, anything else? Like, what do you feel like now, this many books in, that you wish you knew when you were starting?
Well, I mean, I wrote 2 books and, never were published. I never even sent them out. And they were learning process. I had to write the Black Echo. But what I didn't know in those books that it's very simple. It's character. And I was, as a reporter, I had access. I was in police stations. I was at crime scenes. And so I was just overlarding what I was writing with details that didn't matter, procedure, all that stuff. And it just took me a couple of attempts to realize that's all window dressing on character, and the book's going to live or die with the connection of your character to the reader. And, I had, I don't know what your experience is, but I think all writers have to kind of fight their way to that conclusion, and then it starts working. I mean, yeah, I mean, you're a wonderkin. In fact, I can't believe you've written 22 books. I still remember you as the young rookie and all that when we first met many years ago. And but what is your experience? Did you write some and learn some, or were you just you stepped out of the?
I wish I knew earlier the parts that you want to control as a young writer. Somebody once said, and I forget who, but somebody said that when they sold their first book, they thought they'd won the lottery, and they realized they'd won a lottery ticket. I thought that was so interesting. And I wish I knew earlier. It's so hard when you're starting because, when you reach a certain level that you're established, a lot of opportunities are kind of incoming, and there's more of a balance of figuring out what you want to do. But I think that earlier on, I probably spent more time than I needed to trying to control the few things that are controllable, rather than just, putting almost everything into the creative. But it's such a hard balance to figure out because you don't know when you need to really be pushing to get out there. I mean, I was running around. You mentioned the first time we met. I still remember it was at LA Times Festival of Books when it was at UCLA. And it was you, Robert Crais, and T. Jefferson Parker. And I was like in the middle. And there was these 3 giant lines, right? And then there was like tumbleweeds blowing through in front of mine. It was my first book. It was my first time there. And it was so funny. But early on, you want to kind of grind and get stuff going. And I was driving around and stock signing and doing all this. And one of the things you realize that you pointed out is like all that matters, not all that matters, because obviously it's a business and those things have to happen, but so much of what matters is on the page. It's the character, it's the time, it's the work. And, so I think I spent a lot of time driving out to La Brea to sign at a Borders with 2 people. And like some of that stuff I didn't know, but you don't know that really. It's really trial and error. Yeah. And also, as you said, it's everything is character. And I feel like I said that a lot before I understood it all the way. Like I knew it was right cerebrally, but there's a point you get in your gut that you're like, every single action sequence has to be about the character, right? Like every act everything has to tell us more information, or else, we just get that action fatigue feeling or suspense fatigue. So,
yeah, I mean, I agree with the thing you just said about I think I knew that, but it took me a while to understand it. That's exactly it. I remember before I started writing, I had what I think is the best piece of advice ever. It was something I read from Kurt Vonnegut. whose books I loved in college and so forth. And you know, he said the best piece of advice he could give a writer is to make sure everybody on every page wants something, even if it's only a glass of water. And that to me is the key. That alone is what writing is about. But I, you know, and I knew that when I wrote those 2 unsuccessful books, but I didn't get it. And it took a while to get it. And
it's funny because once you get it too, it starts happening, like where you'll have a very secondary character, right? Or someone comes in, like in Fair Warning, you have a scene where there's just what we think is a receptionist, right? When you first go see someone, but they have their own mode. Like it sort of starts happening naturally that you don't have straw men and women populating the plot. Because anytime you're going to introduce a character who we might only have for a minute, they have something to say. They have some perspective, right? There's something that rounds them out more. You know, and that seems really like, you know, that's where you're just living in the world real, and you don't necessarily plan. I mean, at least I don't plan all those things in advance, because sometimes there'll just be a scene, and it seems like in Fair Warning, whenever somebody pops up, there is something they want. There is some perspective they have or irritation that they have, right? There's some way that they're off put. There's never just sort of the generic receptionist or waiter who says all the things that they normally would say. Like even the bartender with the fake French accent, like they're just kind of running a whole other game, right? So there's a whole other subtext to that. And it's, you know, maybe however many books ago, she would have just been a bartender.
Yeah.
So what's the worst part of the process now for you writing? The whole...
It's always been the same, just starting, you know. You can have a good idea. You know, I usually don't start writing a book till I know the beginning and where I'm heading, basically the end. And it can be the end in plot, or it can be an end in character. Like, you know, this one, in my very general, I had this idea that Jack and Rachel would be split, and towards the end they would find reason to hopefully get back together. You know, so it's very unclear. And so therefore, you know, you need 100,000 words and your word count is 0. That to me is the hardest part, to get it going, it's all about momentum. And when you have no words, there's no momentum. So it's about getting to that point. You know, it's a lot of paddling, you know, before you can ride the wave.
So I was thinking back to some of our earlier conversations, and I think this was you, but if I have it wrong, then just tell me. But did you use the metaphor for surfing when you're in the tube and the story's all the way around you?
Yeah, I have. Others have as well.
Yeah. Is that the best part for you of writing now? Like that feeling when you're in it and it's all you're thinking of, and when you get all the answers. And so the why don't you trot out the metaphor again and then
try that. You know, it's kind of like what I just said. You got to do a lot of paddling when you surf. I mean, I haven't surfed since I was in my 20s, but other than trying to teach my daughter once, but it's a lot of work for a very short but beautiful experience. And so in writing, you're paddling, you're trying to get momentum, you're trying to get the story going, and you eventually reach a point where that's all you can think about. And maybe it's like being a drug addict. Maybe I should talk about heroin instead of surfing, because it's all you can think about, and you forsake everything for that. You know, if it takes me about 10 months to write a book, this is a thing that happens for maybe 6 weeks, and where the majority of the book is written, and where the most important part of the book is written, and it all comes together. And, you know, you look like it's the coronavirus and you haven't shaved and all that stuff. And you know,
it gets harder to not write than it does to write.
Yeah, exactly.
And before that, it's the opposite.
Yeah, I love that story about James Thurber, where he's in the tunnel, or whatever you want to call it, and he finally comes to dinner late, and he's just sitting there, and his daughter says to his wife, "Is Dad sick?" And she goes, "No, he's just writing." And it's like, you don't have to be at your laptop. You can be at dinner, you can be with your family, but you're not really really being a good husband or
Yeah, it's
father.
really
because
fun
you're
for everyone
right.
around us during those
Yeah.
stages, I've found. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now do you find with because you have TV, there's family stuff, you have more, I don't know, I don't want to say responsibilities to the community, but you have a lot more opportunities now. You threw out a first pitch in a baseball game, which I still think is the most impressive thing you've ever done. Other stuff comes up. And do you find sometimes now that when you get in the tunnel or in the tube, right, to use our surfing metaphor, that you get knocked out now because it used to be, if you had that 6 weeks, you could just take the 6 weeks. Like, do you have a frustration now that you're in it and you're going, and then all of a sudden you need to get in the writer's room or you need to rewrite, and then it takes you a couple of days to find your footing again? Are you in and out of it?
Yeah, it's definitely become harder to get into it, and it's become easier to pull me out of it.
Right.
Which is a shame, because it is like the nirvana point of your life as a writer. I try to schedule my life more than I used to. I used to be like, this will eventually happen, and when it happens, I'll send up the signals, leave me alone.
Mm-hmm.
But now my life seems to be so scheduled that I can't really do that. So I have a couple months where I gear myself towards being in that tube during those months every year, and I don't always get it. Sometimes I do.
It's weirdly ritualized, isn't it? Like, I was thinking about this. You don't have to think about it as much when we're younger and no one really cares if you have a second novel that much, right? Because you just have all your time, right? And I've been thinking more and more as stuff comes on, and if we're fortunate enough, like you are, to have there be a demand, there's a lot of ritual, I think, that goes into making sure that it works. It reminds me a lot of the baseball players, like, the Nomar Garciaparra, before he steps into the batter's box, right? There's a lot of requirement for getting up to writing and to getting to try to occupy that space. And it's weird because I've been thinking about this a lot I just finished rough draft of the next Orphan X book. And there's that, Stephen King has a great line where he says, you write with the door closed and you write with the door open. Like, there's this weight that comes off where it's like, cool, I can manage more on the bandwidth now. But one of the things I've been thinking about, more than just to finish the story, but a lot of what it is for me now is about occupying a certain space, right? While through the process of me writing the book. Like, if I'm occupying the space within myself, that's the right space when I sit down, the book then gets written. And so it's a weird focus. Instead of being on like page count and word count, it's much more of a focus about how I'm managing myself and my habits and my mood in the space that I occupy when I sit down. So it's a weird switch in focus. I was wondering if you'd found anything like that now that you carve out those months. It's sort of all about you being in a certain state of, not really mind, but state of presence, right?
Yeah, and readiness. Yeah, there, and I can't remember pinpoint why or when, but there was a point where I gave up, or I just stopped worrying about page count and word count every day, and it just became, let's see what happens. Get to the point where I can be in that room with the door closed and see what happens. And it's a great spot to be in, if you can get that. And of course, we're talking about champagne problems here, as my agent always reminds me. Like, oh, woe is me, I have to go make a TV show. I mean, we're very lucky in both of us, in the opportunities we've had and how they keep coming. So this is not really a discussion about how tough life is. It's about how lucky life is, for me. And
I think with you, it's like I was looking at, there's a quotation on the cover here from the Associated Press that's sort of the only quotation you're going to need for the rest of your life. The only blurb. It says, Connelly is the Raymond Chandler of this generation. And it's like, you should just retire now, because it's not going to get better than that. But I think when you've achieved a level of excellence like that, it's not about you talking about the problems or complaining about it, but I think there's a kind of excellence that you achieve that talking about the habits and how you find it is relevant to everyone, no matter what their job is, right? Or no matter what things that they're dealing with, because that habit state of trying to get present in doing the thing that you know you're supposed to be doing. That's all anybody wants, whether you're, a writer or whatever job you're going to have. And so I'm always kind of interested in that habits. It's like people who are geared towards excellence. There seems to be like a presence to it almost. And you can tell, because a lot of writers, you read their, 20th, 30th book, and you start to feel, I don't want to say like it's rote, because God, it's always so hard to write a book, but you feel like there's a familiarity that happens, and you're still writing with a liveliness. And to be able to do that, I mean, what number book is this now?
I think it's 34 or 35.
I mean, that's a whole different kind of thing, like to keep that sort of life and liveliness in it. What do you do to refine that? Like, is that reading?
I put that kind of quote on the cover of my book, and that's quite a responsibility. You put that on your book, you can't mail it in.
That's right.
It raises the bar. Again, going back to my last answer about how lucky we are. When you recognize that, yeah, sure, I'm talented and you're talented, but we both had breaks, lucky stuff that just, comes out of the blue, and it can freak you out when you think about, like, what if, I met the guy who inspired the Lincoln Lawyer. I just met him at random, sitting next to me at a baseball game. What if I went to the game the next day? That kind of stuff can really freak you out. But when you do understand that you've combined talent with some great breaks and great support from some great people, you got to turn that around and just revere it and cherish it and take care of it. So if you're going to put a quote like that on the front of your book, you better damn sure live up to it, and strive every day to live up to it, or don't put it on your book. That's
right. What do you do to kind of keep fueling yourself? I mean, you mentioned reading. There's always the cool, weird articles that are like 5 minutes into the future. And I've had that experience too, where I still remember for my 4th novel, I wrote about like this crazy new practice that they were using, GPS. And I put in what that stands for, chips and cell phones, to track people's movements. And I remember I was at HarperCollins then, and they called me out, like freaking out that phones could be surveilled, and is this real? And like the things that enter our lexicon that we now just take for granted as shorthand. Like you wouldn't even describe that in a book, right? You go straight to, triangulation or trilateration, or like we get all this shorthand. So obviously you're reading stuff like all this, the DNA, but is there other stuff that you find that fuels you? Like you're back and forth. You're in LA, but not full time, right? Is it new places? Is it familiar places? You mentioned all these restaurants, some of which I've eaten at with you. So it's a good kind of return to the neighborhood, but do you have other habits when you want to refill and refuel?
No, I mean, it comes back to what we already said. It's about character. So where I refuel is spending time with people that do what I write about, and you're mining them for inspiration, for the hidden nobility of their jobs. That to me is really a starting point and an inspiration point.
The hidden nobility.
Look what's going on with Minnesota and stuff. It's such a hard, just law enforcement in general is such a hard job to do right, and it's so easy to end up being the guy who kneels on somebody's neck. But it's the people that wouldn't do that, who abhor that kind of stuff, who fight the good fight. And if you can find them and spend time with them, not necessarily just read about heroes in newspapers or something, but if you can reach out to them and spend time with them, it's just such an inspirational thing that you want to go running to your laptop to concoct a story that's going to capture that and send a message of inspiration through your book.
I love that line. You talk about the hidden nobility. I always think about when we're writing characters, we're sort of trying to pull on their mask and see the world through their eye holes, like that's, you have it when you notice that your character's noticing different things than you would, right? Because you've occupied that. And I do feel like a lot of that time is just hanging out time with those guys. It's like drinking in a bar or getting dinner, or like the use of different kinds of slang and conversation where it opens up the fact that you know, you might be sitting at a bar having a drink, but they're not looking at the same bar that you are. Everything they're noticing is a little bit different.
Invariably, you go into one of those things hoping to get X, and you end up with, you know, Y.
Always.
Something else is brought up, and it's illuminating, and one of the, it's not sad, but it's kind of bittersweet, is that these people don't know what the gold is that they're giving you, you know, through their experiences and stuff. And it's just very inspirational to me.
Cool. I see we have a McKenna back just popped up on screen.
Yeah, we have some questions from the comments. So I thought we could maybe get to those really quickly. So this one is from Marilyn. She wants to know how you feel about the value of a journalism degree today. Is it worth getting since there is so much free content online?
Well, someone's got to make that content. So, you know, I'm a big fan of journalism schools and journalism in general. I think no matter what you do in life, you got to be able to tell a story very clearly, succinctly, and convincingly. And journalism school. It's interesting. The business of newspapers is all but collapsed. I went to a University of Florida journalism school, and they're set at 600 students, and they routinely have more than 1,000 applications all the time. So it's weird that so many people want to go down this path towards something that is not really working right now. But you know, there's other opportunities, like Fair Warning is not a newspaper. It exists in a kind of a virtual world. And so I just think if you can tell a story, you can write a story, that you're going to be one step ahead of other people.
Fair enough. Related questions. At least several people have similar questions. But Woody and Jean both have revisited Jack and Rachel with Fair Warning, and they loved it. And they're wondering if you're going to be doing more books with Jack.
I don't know. I don't plan too far ahead. I mean, the opportunity's there. This book totally ends more so than other Jack McAvoy books with a direction for both him and Rachel. And, you know, if the inspiration hits me at the right time, then I'll do that. But I'm writing a book now, and I don't know what I'll write after that one. It's always kind of up in the air.
You want to give us a hint as to what the one you're working on is?
Yeah, it's a Lincoln Lawyer book. It will be out in November. It's called The Law of Innocence. And in this one, Mickey's client is himself. He's accused of a murder.
Okay. I mean, they all are, but it'll be good to see him. We also had a question that I'm going to tie in with a comment of mine. Someone asked what your shirt says. But also,
I'm not hearing you too well.
Someone asked what your shirt says. What your shirt says.
Oh, my shirt. Everybody counts, or nobody counts.
So I wanted to take a moment to thank you for everything you've done to help support the Bink Foundation during this time. It means the world to us as independent booksellers, and we're so grateful for it. So thank you. I know you did that shirt as a fundraiser for the Bink Foundation.
Yeah, I mean, it's a two-way street. You know, Greg was talking about the early days of going to bookstores. It was always so welcome at your store and many others that when at a situation like this, a time like this, of course, we want to turn that back and support you guys the way you've supported us over the years.
Well, we really appreciate it. It's a very different day every day here in the store compared to normal. We miss seeing our customers. So it's appreciated to have voices out there continuing to support us, and mail orders and all of the things that people have done. It's kind of been overwhelming at times. So we are very grateful. Another question from Scott Montgomery, you might know from Book People.
Yeah.
Did you learn anything from writing for TV that you apply to your novels?
Yeah, I do. I kind of talked about that earlier about spreading the story out. Writing for scripts is, Greg should answer this too. it's so dialogue important. It's you know, and it's not like I didn't know that, but it was a good like kind of reteaching moment to you know, use dialogue to advance the story, which you have to do in scripts. You don't necessarily have to do in books, but it's a good practice. Greg, you've done more of this stuff than me. What have you taken back to your books?
You know, you just have so much less room in a screenplay, right? So in a book, you got 400 pages of final product. In a script is like, it's an invitation to collaborate. But at best in a, you know, for a feature, let's say you got 110 pages with a lot of white on the page. And so everything has to drive the plot. And, you know, it's funny because one of the biggest things I've taken away is in screenplays, a lot of times you want to, or, you know, with TV, you come in the middle of a scene, right? Or you come in the aftermath of a scene, right? So there's budget considerations, there's all this stuff. But sometimes the limitations of a form can be really interesting. And so I've started to weave more of that into the books. Like sometimes I'll start a chapter after a fight sequence has taken place, or I'll end a chapter before it happens and not even show it. And so when you have to shoot everything and realize it, you start to realize that giving these slices of what you're not showing can be as cool as what you're showing. And that's been a fun part of it for me, like kind of ducking and weaving between the two.
That's cool.
Yeah. Another question from Mike. Jane would like to know if the Michael Connelly short stories will ever be published in one hardback volume.
Yeah, the year I have writer's block, we'll do that. So my hope is that it'll never happen, but that's kind of like the reserve policy that I'll put that out one year when I'm having trouble, if that ever happens.
You've got them in your back pocket just in case.
Yeah, but I have to say that it's a real art form, and I'm a failure at it. I've written short stories. We all get asked to do them mostly to support a cause or something, but they're not stuff that I'm particularly proud of. So putting them in a collection to me is saying like, these are really good and you should have this collection. So it concerns me a little bit about doing it.
I can already see the marketing campaign. You've just trotted it out for that year with the book. They'll just cut to this. This will be your pitch for why people should buy it.
Yeah.
It's a weird, different animal, short stories.
Yeah.
It's not just a shorter version of something. It's got its own little internal integrity. They function really differently, huh?
Yeah, I try to avoid them.
So you guys are doing okay, healthy, staying home, safe. Are you both writing currently? Excellent, excellent.
There's almost nothing else to do.
Well, it's good that your brain is able to focus on it. There's so many other things going on right now. Let me just check if we have any other questions, John. All right, one's coming hot off the press. All right, someone wants to know if they can still buy those shirts.
They'll probably do, you can go to, through my website, go to the source and click that you'll be interested next time we do some kind of fundraiser. But the fundraiser's over, and I guess they work better if they're compressed into like a 2-week time, and then they gather a waiting list for when they do it next.
I feel like we should auction off the one you're wearing, like Elvis's hair or something. See what we can get for it.
Yeah, tell John to get into the camera. I like what he's wearing today.
I'm and model. Here comes John. Look, he's
All
Nice.
Yeah, they're on bonfire.com, and you can go in and you can request to be notified if they're available again, because I also have on that. We actually have a campaign ending in 2 days with a Murder by the Book t-shirt that says appreciating locked rooms since 1980. So our campaign is through Bonfire as well. They've been great, and that ends in 2 days. I think the last question we have from the comments, and if we didn't get to yours, I'm sorry, we're going to run out of time. Has the lockdown affected my friend's place?
I think that it's affected everything, but they've had to, like I just gathered, what was it, 250 masks, breathing masks for them, because they still have, homeless kids coming in seeking services. Now, it's not a shelter. It's a place that puts people into shelters and gives them training, and also gives them things to live with, food and other materials and so forth. But essentially, a lot of them go back out on the streets, and they had no masks to give them. And I found a lady who was kind of a furloughed costume designer, and so she started making masks, and we got them to her, and so that's been pretty good. But I think, like all these agencies, they're having a difficult time providing the services they want to provide.
Yeah. I think Ron said we might have gotten cut off, so I'm out. So we are not streaming on Facebook anymore, even though it says live on my screen. Bear with me, and we'll start the stream again in 2 seconds. Just stay put. And wait, are we here?
Yeah, we're live.
We are back live. Never mind. So I don't know if we had a glitch or if we've been live the whole time. Okay, well, that actually seems like a perfect time to wrap up. If you've enjoyed this, we'll be back tonight at 7 Central for a discussion with another Los Angeles author, Ivy Pashota, who will be joined by the 2 women who make up the name Liv Constantine. I'll also be back tomorrow at 12 with a cup of bush tea to discuss Alexander McCall Smith's latest release. He'll be joining us all the way from Scotland. So thank you so much for your time and watching. If you're interested in ordering anything, we're online at murderbooks.com. You can email us at order@murderbooks.com or call us at 713-524-8597. I would like to take a minute to thank Michael Connelly, the people at Little Brown Books, and Michael Connelly's team for helping to arrange this, as well as Gregg Hurwitz for taking time out of his day to join us. Thank you so much, guys.
McKenna, Greg, thanks very much. Good to see you guys.
Congratulations. It's a beautiful piece of writing. Good to see you.
Thank you, guys.
Have a good day. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.